just half a cup of this yogurt, is that really good to burn visceral fat, lose weight, and drop your insulin?
I believe so. Gasseri by itself reduces waist circumference by several centimeters. I don't know about you, Rena. I hate the gym. I can't stand going to the gym.
Dr. William Davis is a cardiologist who is one of the first doctors to truly understand how a dysbiotic gut microbiome links to visceral fat and heart disease.
The microbiome is the major driver of insulin resistance, expansion of abdominal fat. You take an antibiotic, for instance, even let's say 5 days of erythromycin, you've lost several hundred species of beneficial microbes. So we have to supplement magnesium. Got to supplement vitamin D. We get omega-3 fatty acids and iodine from supplements. Probiotics, people often think, are the solution. They're not.
If you fix the gut microbiome, is that really good for the heart?
Yes. When they say, what should I do with my high cholesterol? I tell them, get a big, thick, black magic marker and cross them out.
If you're struggling to lose weight or manage insulin resistance, the standard advice is eat less and move more. But as a health researcher, I have spent time looking at the clinical outcomes of this advice. And frankly, the long-term success rates are abysmal. The data suggests that there is a massive hidden variable, often left out, and that is the gut microbiome. Now, this isn't just a trend. We're seeing a profound physiological link between microbial health and metabolic function. Joining me today is a doctor who has been at the forefront of this clinical research for decades, Dr. William Davis. Today, he'll explain how a dysbiotic microbiome drives visceral fat and even insulin resistance, blocking weight loss, even if you're carnivore or keto. We're also sharing his updated 2026 Super Yogurt Protocol and why the very first sign of your internal health is actually your poop. Now, if you're like me and you're tired of traditional healthcare advice and you want to join a community of evidence-based, curious minds, a really easy step is to hit the subscribe button, because next week I'm sitting down with Dr. Ben Bickman to discuss the specific insulin trick proven to burn fat faster. So, Dr. Davis, my first question. You understand the connection between the gut, insulin, and weight loss better than most experts. So if somebody's coming to this and then cutting their calories to lose weight, do you think that is the most effective strategy?
That's the confusing issue, Rena. We thought this for decades. Come on, common sense. You cut calorie intake, you lose weight. And that's true up front. The science has become very clear in the last 10, 20 years. And so a lot of the information all the things we thought in years past proved untrue. And here's the problem. You cut calories. Now, we could call it a low-calorie diet. We could call it a meal replacement program. We could call it a GLP-1 agonist drug. We could call it a bariatric procedure like lap band or gastric bypass. All variations on the same theme, reduce calories. And they work up front. You can lose, for instance, on a GLP-1 agonist, say 40 pounds. Problem. We now know with absolute confidence of the weight you lose, 25% is muscle. Now, that compounds the muscle loss of aging. So as you know, at about age 30 to about my age, late 60s, 70s, you lose about a third of muscle. So it compounds. The muscle loss of weight loss compounds the age-related loss of muscle. So people who lose weight by reducing calories in any form will lose huge amounts of muscle. And we know with confidence when you lose muscle, your basal metabolic rate, that is, the rate at which your body consumes calories for the work of life, breathing, digestion, all that stuff, is reduced by about 25 to 30% or so. And what's eye-opening about that is the effect is essentially permanent. For all practical purposes, it's not transient, it's permanent. This evidence comes from the U.S.'s National Institutes of Health, the NIH, not from pharma, not from some naturopathic practice in Des Moines, Iowa. It comes from the NIH, so very solid. So for instance, The Biggest Loser TV show, where they put you through this extreme program, right? Extreme exercise, 4 to 6 hours a day, resistance exercise, aerobic exercise, extreme calorie reduction. Well, I talked to one of the graduates, Danny Cahill. He was the winner. Renee, he was the winner in 2015 because he lost 239 pounds in 7 months. Extraordinary. He, very disciplined guy. And by the way, this whole notion that people are obese and overweight because they're lazy or slothful, I mean, he defies that, right? He was incredibly committed. 239 pounds, extreme exercise, 800 calories per day. The end of the season, he's on stage. He looks great. By the way, all the winners are wearing Spanx because they all have loose skin flaps. You don't see that part, right? But he looks great, at least on the surface. He wins the $250,000 prize, right? Looks great. Leaves the show. He and almost all other contestants continued an extreme exercise program. He told me 6 days a week, 2 hours a day, resistance aerobic, and a low-calorie lifestyle, regained all the weight. Went to the annual reunions hosted by the producers of the TV show, and he saw over the years everybody regain the weight. The NIH group studied these people at their time of graduation and then compared a measure of basal metabolic rate, BMR we say, 6 years later. It was persistent. The drop in BMR of about 27% persisted for 6 years. So for all practical purposes, it's a long-term, if not permanent effect. And it's due to loss of muscle. So you want to protect muscle like a pile of diamonds. You do not want to lose muscle. And so you have to counteract both the loss of muscle that occurs in weight loss, or don't allow it to happen in the first place, and also compensate for the loss of muscle that occurs with aging. There are ways to do it. Ladies all say, but I don't want to go to the gym for 2 hours a day, 6 days. Well, no one wants to. I don't know about you, Rena. I hate the gym. I can't stand going to the gym. I'll go 15 minutes once a week at the most and do other things, walk, ride your bike, etc. But it does not mean you have to go to the gym and hang out with the bodybuilders. There are ways to minimize or even backpedal on the loss of muscle without doing extreme exercise.
I'll ask you this because you're an expert along with being a cardiologist, so everything heart health, which we want to talk about. If somebody has a poor gut microbiome, can that affect their ability to lose weight even when they're trying to do all the right things?
Rena, huge effect. But it takes a bit of a leap of logic to understand why. So it's not the presence of unhealthy microbes alone. So there's a series of events that have occurred in about half of Canadians, half of Americans. And that is, all of us have been widely overexposed to antibiotics. In the US alone, 650,000 prescriptions for antibiotics are written every day. Every day. Most of us by age 40 have taken 30 courses of antibiotics. For every 1,000 children, over 1,300 prescriptions are written for an antibiotic every year. So wild overexposure, and not to mention exposure to glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, which is an antibiotic also. Emulsifying agents, extremely destructive. Factors like polysorbate 80, that increase intestinal barrier dysfunction, increase the entry of bacterial byproducts. Anyway, but the sequence goes something like this. Overexposure to all those things killed off or reduced beneficial microbes. These are species like Lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, Fecalibacterium, Akkermansia, Lactospiraceae, blah, blah, blah. We lose those beneficial bacteria, or they're reduced in number. Well, they were suppressing the overproliferation of unhealthy microbes, mostly in the category of proteobacteria or fecal microbes. These are E. coli, Pseudomonas, Campylobacter, which may sound familiar to your listeners because they're also the species of food poisoning and urinary tract infections, as well as other infections. So we lose beneficial bacteria. Those unhealthy proteobacteria, fecal microbes, are allowed to excessively proliferate in the colon and then ascend into the small intestine. The small intestine is not well equipped to deal with this. It's not as well protected as the colon because you're not supposed to have trillions of microbes there, especially fecal microbes. Well, those fecal microbes are very inflammatory to an already permeable small intestine. Small intestines is where you absorb nutrients like amino acids and vitamins and minerals. So the presence of these fecal microbes increase the permeability of the small intestine. These microbes only live for a few hours. When they die, they shed some of their toxic compounds, but one specifically is called endotoxin. lipopolysaccharide endotoxin that enters the bloodstream. We call that endotoxemia. So there's a several-fold increase in the blood levels of endotoxin. Now, the extreme of endotoxemia is sepsis. So if you ever saw sepsis in a hospital, somebody has, for instance, a bladder infection and doesn't get treated, it ascends the kidneys, pyelonephritis, fever, back pain, then it enters the bloodstream, sepsis. Now you go into respiratory failure, kidney failure, you get intubated on a mechanical ventilator, and a mortality rate of 20 to 50%. That's the consequence of extreme endotoxemia. Well, we're not talking about that extreme. We're talking about a much reduced, what I call sepsis light, the endotoxemia from this overproliferation of fecal microbes, proteobacteria in the permeable small intestine. And that is a major driver of insulin resistance, inflammation, expansion of abdominal fat, as well as anxiety, depression, hatred, violence, dementia, Parkinson's disease, rosacea, psoriasis, coronary disease, coronary plaque rupture, carotid disease, atrial fibrillation, congestive heart failure, fibromyalgia, sleep apnea. In other words, Rena, we've got to almost reconsider all we thought we knew about health, including weight loss, in light of the contribution of this incredible process of endotoxemia.
I was asking about weight loss, but Dr. Davis, you just mentioned like 10 other things that probably my listeners going to say, crap, I have that one as well. You mentioned elevated insulin. So if you have an imbalance in your gut, all these bad guys are overpopulating. Can that lead to an elevated insulin level, even if you're doing all the right things?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So such an easy test, right, Rena? So a slender, healthy person without these problems will have a fasting blood insulin level of somewhere between 0 and 4 microunits per liter. A person who is type 2 diabetic and thereby extremely insulin resistant will have a fasting insulin level of 130, 150, not 10% worse, not 30%, but 20-fold worse, 50-fold, 100-fold worse. And of course, that high level of insulin is the provocative factor to cause expansion of abdominal fat, as well as hypertension, coronary disease, dementia, breast cancer, etc. So that very high level of insulin, reflecting insulin resistance, that is the inability of your brain, muscle, and liver and other organs to respond to insulin, causes your pancreas to overproduce huge amounts. And by the way, so that process of we have the small intestinal infestation of fecal proteobacteria, where does the venous drainage, the veins, where does venous blood go when it empties from your liver, small intestine, colon, all abdominal organs, pancreas? Where does it go? It goes into what's called the portal venous system, the portal vein, that goes directly to the liver, not to the systemic circulation, to the liver. So your poor liver takes a beating with this endotoxin. And this is why we're seeing this flood, this epidemic of fatty liver, because your liver's getting beaten up by this. There's other factors also, but a big player is portal venous endotoxemia from this process of overproliferated fecal microbes in the small intestine and colon.
Got it. So basically, if somebody's coming to this, they want to lose weight, they want to lower their insulin and fix a disease that they have, for example, fatty liver, you got to fix your gut. We also got to put on muscle, which you mentioned. I want to ask about probiotics because people think they can take that. Is that going to help?
So I fear, Rena, that probiotics, people often think, are the solution. They're not. Let me tell you how probiotics are formulated, because I formulate probiotics. You say something like this, oh, well, I think Lactobacillus acidophilus is good. Throw that in. Oh, I think Bifidobacterium longum is good. Throw that in. How about some Bifidobacterium infantis? Throw that in. In other words, they're haphazard, slapdash collections of microbes. They're not created with any kind of rhyme, reason, theme. There's only one person I know of, and my friend, Dr. Raul Cano, 40-year academic microbiologist from Cal Polytech in California, and he actually tries to create what we call consortia or guilds of microbes that collaborate. They don't talk to each other, of course, but they communicate via metabolites and other things. And so now that's a work in progress. So right now, most probiotics are nothing more than haphazard collections, and often, sad to say, Rena, with gimmicks built in. Gimmicks like, oh, we double encapsulate so that it delays dissolution into the colon. Now, wait a minute, the problem's in the small intestine too. Why would you want to delay dissolution into the colon? Or there's all kinds of gimmickry now because it's a competitive industry. And so the approach I've been taking is one, I don't want to pay a lot of money for a probiotic. And let's focus. So one thing we can't do is we know the science is quite clear. You take an antibiotic, for instance, even let's say 5 days of clarithromycin, you've lost several hundred species of beneficial microbes. Well, you can't really restore all hundreds of those purposefully, right? There's no way to do that. So what I've been doing is cultivating what I think are the keystone or foundational microbes that have the largest effect. So one of the strategies we do is we choose microbes that colonize the small intestine as well as colon, which is unusual for a probiotic species. So colonize small intestine and colon and produce what are called bacteriocins, natural antibiotics. They're smarter than commercial. Commercial antibiotics are stupid because they're indiscriminate. They kill bad microbes, yes. They also kill lots of beneficial microbes. But the bacteriocins produced naturally by microbes are smarter. They only kill those fecal microbes, those proteobacteria. So there are three I focus on at the start of anybody's program. We start with Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus gasseri. Those two colonize small intestine and colon, and Bacillus subtilis. Subtilis doesn't colonize the small intestine. It's a spore, so it germinates in the small intestine. And all three produce lots of bacteriocins. For instance, I took my strain I have of Bacillus subtilis, and I DNA sequenced it. It has 7 genes for bacteriocin production. Reuteri produces a very potent bacteriocin called reuterin, and it's very effective in killing those fecal microbes. So we ferment those 3. Now, in the original recipe, I co-fermented them together, but it became clear, and I changed out the Bacillus coagulans for Bacillus subtilis. There's nothing wrong with Bacillus coagulans. It's a really interesting microbe, but it proved unreliable in dairy fermentation. So I switched it out for subtilis, which is very easy to ferment, and we now kind of individually ferment, or you can ferment the reuteri gasseri together because they ferment in similar ways, which is 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius, for about 36 hours for those 2 lactobacillus species. Because what we're taking advantage of, Rena, is, so reuteri, for instance, doubles, they don't have sex, doubles every 3 hours at human body temperature. We're going to let it double 12 times. And when we count the number of microbes using something called flow cytometry, we get 300 billion per 120 milliliter serving. So that's what we want. We're going to go to battle. We're going to go to battle against trillions of fecal microbes. You better go with a good army, right? If you go with a teensy-weensy probiotic with a few million or few billion, you're not going to do anything. We're going to go in with hundreds of billions. And so we ferment the reuteri gasseri, human body temperature, 36 hours. The subtilis is easier. It's 90 degrees Fahrenheit. What's that, about 32 or so, right? 34 Celsius, 24 hours. Then we consume. Quarter cup, give or take, every day. It usually eradicates this problem, the SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and colonic dysbiosis, starting at about 4 weeks. But sadly, Rena, there are people who say things like this, well, I took antibiotics for 3 years for acne or Lyme disease or whatever, and they have terrible, terrible degrees of SIBO. They may have to do this for a long, long time. And I do encourage people, even if they eradicate their SIBO, say in 4 to 8 weeks, to do this intermittently, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, because there is a tendency for unclear reasons for this process to recur. One of my great concerns, Rena, is that you, me, our listeners are exposed to huge factors that continue to disrupt the microbiome, even if you clean up your life. Even if you filter your drinking water from chlorine and fluoride, even if you eat only organic and don't have exposure to extreme amounts of pesticides, herbicides. For instance, there's ubiquitous exposure to PFAS. There's ubiquitous exposure to microplastics, and the science has become clear now that micro and nanoplastics, smaller, you can't see, are negatively charged and attract positively charged compounds like heavy metals, cadmium, mercury, and PFAS, glyphosate, BPA. So microplastics are not just about microplastics. They are vehicles or vectors for other toxic compounds. And so, because as you know, it's very difficult to reduce your exposure to plastics. It's everywhere. And so while we can minimize or eradicate SIBO up front, there's this continuing need, probably for a lifetime until the world gets cleaned up, if it ever gets cleaned up, to keep it from coming back.
So you're talking about the different microbes that we need to put into our gut to help flourish our gut. So controlling the bad guys, also giving lots of good guys. I want to ask, because people, they're coming to this because they want to lose weight and they want to fix the visceral fat. Does Lactobacillus gasseri target fat better than other microbes?
Maybe. You know, there's 2 studies now that suggest that gasseri by itself reduces waist circumference by several centimeters. And if you do cross-sectional CT or MRI scanning and measure the surface area of visceral fat, fat surrounding abdominal organs, gasseri is a real winner. Reduces cross-sectional area of about 20 plus centimeters. Now, unfortunately, as often happens, we don't have comparative studies. Let's say, let's pose gasseri versus reuteri versus Pediococcus acetylacticide versus Pediococcus pentaceus versus Lactobacillus plantarum. There's almost no evidence to compare. But you're right. Gasseri may be among the champions in reducing abdominal visceral fat. And that's one of the components, of course. Now, why would that be? Why would gasseri reduce abdominal visceral fat? Well, no one knows for a fact. By the way, we've been doing clinical trials to try to understand that better. It's probably, at the very least, a reduction in that endotoxemia. Because gasseri is one of the guys who colonizes small intestine and produces bacteria. And gasseri is very good at producing bacteria, up to 2 to 4, typically, depending on strain. So maybe there's other effects, but no one's charted what those are yet.
As Dr. Davis mentions, your health starts with what you eat, your immune system, and your gut function. And you can eat the cleanest diet in the world, like doing carnivore or keto. But if your gut barrier is strained, other parts of your body and how it functions are going to feel it. Think of it this way. Our modern world is constantly putting strain on our gut. And when that happens, those toxins leak into your bloodstream and it can trigger a response that travels throughout your whole body, leading to that foggy feeling or that tired feeling. And instead of focusing on energy and focus, your body is distracted, fighting these tiny fires in your gut. And that is why I have made armored colostrum a staple in my morning routine. Now, if you aren't familiar, colostrum is actually the first milk produced after birth. It is literally nature's blueprint for building a strong immune system and a healthy gut. And Armour is a whole food powerhouse with over 400 bioactive nutrients that help seal those leaks I was talking about earlier, which is why I've been feeling so much more energized and focused. And for my carnivore friends, the unflavored version is 100% carnivore. And I just use 4 scoops in cold water every morning to keep that gut barrier strong. And if you want to try it out, just go to armour.com/The Primal Podcast or use code The Primal Podcast to get 15% off your first order. I've also linked them down below. Okay, I just wanted to ask because this is like a magic super yogurt, as you call it, and it can fix the gut, help you lose weight, lose wrinkles, make you feel better, all the rest of it. And then it's good to understand, what is it in these microbes that can actually help. I want to turn our attention to your new human clinical study. We can't talk about it yet because it's not published. This is brand new information, but it's very promising for people to understand if they fix their gut, there is a strong endpoint towards visceral fat, losing the visceral fat and weight loss. Can you tell us a little bit about that study?
Yeah, so forgive me. It's, as you know, if we talk too much in detail about a study prior to publication, we're barred from publication. So one thing your listeners should understand, there's 2 general depots of fat. There's abdominal visceral fat. That's the most problematic form of fat because that's a source of inflammation insulin resistance. It's the fat in your abdomen that you can't always see. You know that somebody who has a protuberant abdomen, they have a lot of it, but you can still be slender and still have a lot of it. And so there are ways to figure that out. But it's abdominal visceral fat is the most problematic form of fat, and abdominal visceral fat triggers, oddly, deposition of fat in other parts of the body around the heart. Epicardial fat that accelerates atherosclerosis, heart attack, and sudden cardiac death. It can accumulate in the kidney, cause kidney disease. It can accumulate in your knees and hips, where it accelerates the degradation of cartilage and takes you closer to bone-on-bone arthritis, and many other organs. So that's called ectopic fat. It can also accumulate in muscle, myosteatosis, and that's part of the process. If you have abdominal visceral fat, you likely have some measure of myosteatosis, which accelerates the loss of strength and muscle mass. So abdominal visceral fat's not just abdominal visceral fat. The other kind of fat is subcutaneous fat. That's fat beneath the surface, in your buttocks, thighs, chest, neck. It may be an aesthetic issue. It may be a weight challenge to weight-bearing joints, but it doesn't have the same kind of implications that abdominal visceral fat has, like insulin resistance. So it's abdominal visceral fat. Now here's something to chew on. Reducing calories, whether it's by diet, GLP-1 agonist, or bariatric procedure, are all semi-selective for loss of subcutaneous fat, not abdominal. You will lose some abdominal visceral fat, so the benefits of those strategies are further eroded by the fact that they're not selective for the most problematic form of fat, the fat that drives weight mismanagement. So I've asked this question, well, can we specifically target abdominal visceral fat even more? Can we specifically prevent loss of muscle, maybe even cause regain of muscle? You know, when I first started doing this personally, many years ago, in my early 60s, and as I mentioned to you before, I hate going to the gym, can't stand it. So I would go once a week for 15 minutes using machines and go for walks, ride my bike other times, right? And so I'd go to the gym once a week at 15 minutes, and over 3 weeks, I gained, I think my experience a little over the top, but I gained 13 pounds of muscle, and my strength increased by 50%. So I was doing, for instance, lat pull downs, like 130 pounds for 10 repetitions. It went to 200 pounds. Rena, over 15 minutes a week. It's not like I was trying to be a strong man. I just was going and then getting the hell out of there. And yet I had this marked increase in muscle mass and strength. Now, I think there's something here I've noticed. This is anecdotal. I think it's people who had more musculature when they were younger who are the ones who regain it. So if you said I was a long distance runner and I didn't have a lot of muscle because I was low, you probably won't gain as much. But if you said, yeah, I had more musculature because I did shot put or weight, whatever, you tend to regain more. That's anecdotal. That's not yet proven, but I think that's what I'm seeing.
So in your new human study, which is not published yet, did you see reduction in abdominal fat from microbiome strategies?
Yes.
Awesome. Let's move on. So let's talk about how to make the super yogurt. Do you think if somebody has just half a cup of this yogurt every day, minimum 4 weeks, we're going to talk about how to make it, is that really good to burn visceral fat, lose weight, and drop your insulin?
I believe so, because we're seeing it play out.
That's very diplomatic, Dr. Davis. Just say, damn, yes, because I've helped so many people. But you're very diplomatic.
We have yet to do the clinical trial on that one, because I debated with myself, we don't want to do it as yogurt. Certainly not yogurt you make at home. There's too many variations, too many variables. So I debated whether we do it in a central kitchen and provide it to people or encapsulate it. Now, the problem with encapsulation of what we're doing in the yogurt is how many microbes. Because when you encapsulate something, the cost goes sky high. That's why you don't have probiotics with 300 billion in a capsule, because it would cost you $400 or $500 a month. No one wants to pay that. And so, by the way, yogurt is an inexpensive and easy way, do it yourself at home, method of increasing bacterial counts 100 or 1,000-fold without having to incur all these costs.
Okay, let's talk about the recipe. This is referenced in your new book, Super Body. People will know you from Super Gut and your book, Wheat Belly. But this is talking about how we can smooth our skin, improve the body composition. People want to know, how do I make this new updated 2026 yogurt recipe? Dr. Davis, can you walk us through the steps?
Yeah, so you have to source the microbes. So let's choose, for instance, Lactobacillus gasseri. One of the difficulties with playing with microbes is there may be hundreds, if not thousands, of different strains. And they can, like all humans are not the same. There's tall humans, short humans, fat humans, skinny humans, all kinds of different humans. Same thing with microbes. There's all different kinds, even within. So what if we said, all Irish people are the same? No, they're not, right? Same thing here. You can have a species, Lactobacillus gasseri, and you can have enormous variation within that species. We have to be careful which microbes. So what I do is I screen the microbes for the characteristics we want. And by the way, Rena, those are 3 microbes I use because they're what I call keystone or foundational species. And I think they're better than antibiotics because they're selective and they start the process of restoring other microbes. So it's impossible to restore the hundreds of missing microbes. But it opens the door to the restoration of those microbes, especially if you incorporate fermented foods. So important, Rena, so important. Kimchi, sauerkraut, veggies you ferment on your kitchen counter, kombucha, all that stuff. The crazy thing about fermented foods is the species, most of the species in fermented foods, these are species like Luganostoc mesenteritis or Pediococcus epentaceus. They don't take up residence in the GI tract. You ingest them as that food, you poop them out. How are they beneficial then? Well, it's not quite clear, but it's speculated that they somehow nourish and encourage the restoration of all those lost microbes. Not quite clear how. It's likely that those beneficial microbes, like Faecalibacterium, Akkermansia, Lactospiraceae, have been there, but sequestered and present in very low numbers, probably in the mucus barrier. And somehow the consumption of these fermented foods encourages their proliferation and return to bigger numbers. So fermented foods are the unsung heroes of the microbiome. So we start with that 3 microbe SIBO yogurt concoction. Then we rebuild and help restore beneficial microbes. You can see a commercial probiotic can help, but it's not the thing you do. And what I hope over time, who knows, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we'll be smarter about probiotics. And we say, okay, now we understand what we're trying to achieve with probiotics. And we're going to restore not just haphazard, we're going to restore, for instance, this consortium of collaborative species that help further rebuild, restore missing microbes. So I think that's where that's going to happen. But anyway, back to your question.
Going back to how they can actually make this SIBO yogurt recipe. So the strain matters because not all Lactobacillus gasseri is the same.
Right. So the 2 strains that we have evidence for, not my evidence, a lot of this came from Asia, South Korea, is the 2055, and I'm sorry, I don't make these designations up, and the BNR 17 strain. So in my Super Gut book, Super Body, I tell you where to get them. This is not expensive. There's an upfront purchase of the microbe from the right sources. You also need some kind of device, doesn't have to be fancy, that can keep your microbes, at least to start, at about human body temperature. Now, if you really get into this stuff, you want a device where you can vary the temperature. So Subtilis likes 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Gasseri likes about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. There are some microbes that like 115 to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. There are some microbes that ferment at room temperature. So ideally, you have a device where the temperature can be varied. And the timing can be varied also, because we're not going to do what they do in commercial yogurt making, which is 4 to 6 hours, typically sometimes 12 hours. We're going to go much longer, typically 36 hours. So, if your device only goes for 12 hours, you don't want to be always fussing. And so ideally, temperature variable, time variable. So some yogurt makers can do that. Many sous vides can do that, sticker basin sous vides. And some of the instant pots with a yogurt setting can kind of do that. But all you want is a device that allows you to keep it around human body temperature. It helps to have a prebiotic fiber. So we like to use inulin because it's more likely to be sterile or not contaminated by microbes. That was another issue I did not appreciate at the start. And what we're doing, it's like throwing cow manure on your garden, your backyard garden. You you're going to have more tomatoes and juicier tomatoes. So we want to ensure that there's something for those microbes to eat besides lactose. And so we throw in a little bit of, like a tablespoon per liter of prebiotic fiber. And then we, of course, ferment for a prolonged period. You know, when I first did this and I called the manufacturer of the commercial source of the rotor, I said, hey, I'm making yogurt with your... And they said, oh, no, that's impossible. No one's ever been able to do that. I said, well, I've done it many, many times. No, you can't do it. You can't do it. Don't call us again. Which I found funny.
Okay, so let me just summarize. So you need the Lactobacillus gasseri. There's different strains that I'll try to leave the information in the show notes below, but I'll also link your book, Superbody, which outlines the information. But you mentioned BNR17 strain. You need a Lactobacillus reuteri. Again, information in the show notes. You need Bacillus subtilis, and again, that has changed. That's the updated version from your old recipe. So the strains are important. So basically, you want to use milk or half and half. You want to use inulin, prebiotic fiber, and it gets the whole thing started, basically. So question for you, if somebody doesn't like milk and half enough, they don't want dairy, can they use coconut milk instead?
Yeah, it has to be canned coconut milk, not the carton thin coconut milk. And it can't have any thickeners in it, can't have gellan gum, xanthan gum. The only one allowable is guar gum, because the presence of those emulsifying agents tends to cause separation. There's a couple of additional steps if you use coconut milk, because as you know, when you open a can of coconut milk, it's separated typically. And so we add a couple of steps. We preheat. There's a rare pathogen in coconut milk, so we preheat 180 degrees for a few minutes, let it cool. We add the prebiotic fiber. We add some guar gum, like a teaspoon of guar gum, to inhibit separation. Then we hit it with a stick blender for about a minute or more to make it thick. Then we add the microbe. Got to add the microbe after the blending because the blender will kill the microbe. And then you let it ferment. And I like to add a tablespoon of sugar also, in addition to the inulin, because there's no lactose and you want to have enough food for the microbes to eat. And that works pretty well.
Got it. Okay, so that is the updated recipe for your SIBO yogurt, which is going to help fix the gut, help you lose weight, lower your insulin. I want to move now beyond the SIBO yogurt. Other protocols, steps that people have to do, because the yogurt is just one thing. But as you said, there's so many things that can destroy our gut. So a protocol to help people lose weight and fix their gut. Step 1 from your book, quit the carbs like wheat and grains. Why do you have to do that?
Well, a big driver, as you know, of weight gain, especially in the abdomen, is insulin resistance and inflammation. So if all you do is cut calories, you can unwind insulin resistance a little bit. But a much more direct route to doing that is, this sounds stupid, get rid of the foods that raise insulin. Wheat, grains, and sugars. Not bacon, not butter, not beef. Just wheat, grains, and sugar. So that reduces insulin dramatically, and it allows the release of abdominal visceral fat. Now, we also add back basic nutrients lacking in modern life. So when your listeners get up in the morning, they don't run to the river and drink water, because if you did, you'd probably get diarrhea and who knows what else from that contaminant. So you have to filter your water. Well, water filtration is very effective, and it removes all magnesium. And modern produce, as you know, has 90% less magnesium than it should have, as it did years ago in wild plants. So we have to supplement magnesium. Got to supplement vitamin D. Canada, US, I'd like to go outside for vitamin D, but I'm in suburban Chicago. It was 20-some degrees last night, and it was freezing. You can't go outside, and if you did, and even if you were naked, the sun's not strong enough. So we supplement vitamin D. Iodine, likewise. Any inland territory, you're deprived of the ocean's iodine, unless you ate all kinds of seafood and seaweed, which we can't because seafoods contained by mercury and microplastics, and seafood, shellfish is contained by cadmium and microplastics. So we get omega-3 fatty acids and iodine from supplements. Those 4 things. It sounds random, Rena. Vitamin D, magnesium, omega-3 fatty acids, iodine. It sounds random, but they're not. They serve intrinsic need, things you need and without which you die or get very sick. But when put together, synergize to minimize insulin resistance. And then we address the endotoxemia that also drives insulin resistance. So what we're really doing is taking multiple steps to minimize insulin resistance and inflammation, that endotoxemia. But we also have to clean up our lives. So for instance, if you had ice cream and it had xanthan gum, gellan gum, carrageenan, and polysorbate 80 emulsifiers, because the manufacturer doesn't want you to eat it and it thaws and then you refreeze it. Now it's a disgusting ice ball and disgusting solid. You can't eat it. So they add these tons of emulsifying agents and many other foods likewise. Well, those emulsifiers, the science is quite clear. Not only dissolve your mucus barrier and open the door to endotoxemia, it's now been shown that emulsifiers in peanut butter, salad dressing, ice cream, you name it, it's in there. Increase insulin resistance, increase endotoxemia, increase fat weight in the abdomen, increase blood glucose, increase appetite, and cause weight gain. So in other words, yeah, you can do all those good things, take a probiotic, but there's other things we got to do, such as clean up our diets, avoid emulsifying agents, avoid preservatives, which are antimicrobial, in food and in your body. It sounds overwhelming, but I tell people, don't let that happen. Just get real food. Eggs, pork, avocados, foods that have no labels, foods that don't need nutrition panels, something that a food manufacturer, and you know this is all coming to a head now with the awareness of processed and ultra-processed foods. And so getting rid of all those foods. Nabisco, General Mills, they hate that, but I'm sorry, they screwed up. For the past 70 years, they've proliferated the food supply with garbage foods, and that's it's not the only reason, but it's a big part of the reason we have all these problems.
Question for you, because people love iodine. So that's part of your supplement stack: vitamin D, magnesium, the omega-3 fatty acids, iodine. How much iodine do you recommend people to take?
You know, tough question, because, you know, when something doesn't make a lot of money, it doesn't support a lot of research. So several things for your listeners to know. So the RDA, the recommended daily allowance for iodine, is 150 micrograms per day. Well, how'd they get that? Well, the question was asked in the 1920s, over a century ago. What quantity of iodine is necessary to not have a goiter and a large thyroid gland? You know, Rena, people, including my colleagues, have forgotten that lack of iodine and goiters was a huge public health problem all throughout human history until we started getting iodine. In the US, it was 1924. The FDA recognized this problem, said, how do you get iodine to the population? Because the population there's no TV, there's no internet, there's no radio. A quarter of the population is illiterate. Well, how do you so they launched a public poster campaign. Use more iodized salt, they put in salt, keep your family goiter-free. People did it, and people listened, and goiters went away. Before that, they were everywhere. If you go to your museum, like in Rome or Paris, whatever, and look at the statues or the paintings, look at their necks. You're going to see goiters. A lot of them have. This was huge. If your great-grandma was around, you said, hey, great-grandma, tell me about goiters when you were a little girl. She would say, Rena, you wouldn't believe it. My next-door neighbor died at age 13 of heart failure. And she gained 80 pounds. Her legs are swollen. My teacher had to wear this special neck brace to support her goiter. It was so large. And then she died of suffocation and heart failure. There was a name for this. It was called myxedema coma. You'd go into a coma, then you would die from lack of iodine. So this was a huge problem. It's gone away. It's coming back. Not as bad. So the FDA and other agencies said, hey, we think there's a problem here with sodium and salt. Because what they didn't recognize, of course, was that the proliferation of ultra-processed foods and ridiculous advice to cut your saturated fat and cholesterol cause increased consumption of carbohydrates and other factors that cause insulin resistance that causes sodium retention. So they mistakenly blamed sodium. The problem was not sodium. The problem was insulin resistance from all these other factors. And so, but because people hear that, they've cut back on their salt use and goiters are coming back. Not as bad as in the 1920s, because to some degree, the food supply has been globalized. You get, avocados from Mexico, you get blueberries from Venezuela, that kind of a thing. So it's not as bad as it was, but it is coming back to some degree.
Now, as Dr. Davis mentions, a very simple way to fix your gut is to focus on what you eat. But he also mentions other toxins that can destroy your gut function. And these include everyday products you're likely using, like your toothpaste, your body wash, and even your shampoo. Now, these products have ingredients that you probably don't want in your body, like parabens, phthalates, and even fluoride, which soak through your skin and even through your gums. And these chemicals don't just interfere with your hormones and your insulin, they can disrupt your health, even when you're doing everything right. And that's why we created the Primal Tallow Balms and soaps and our new shampoo bars. Everything that we make is chemical-free, made from 100% grass-fed tallow. It's packed with vitamins A, D, E, and K2. The best thing is there's no preservatives, there's no fake fragrances. There is just stuff that your body actually recognizes. And I've been using this unscented soap every single day. It's incredibly gentle without stripping your skin's natural skin barrier. And if you're in the US, great news, our USA store is now open, which means faster shipping and cheaper prices. And for the next 7 days, get up to 30% off our new shampoo bars and body wash. Just head to theprimal.com/shampoo or use code shampoo at checkout. There's also a link in the description. Okay, so I'm hearing that we need iodine. So just to try to answer the question from the work of Dr. Kenberry, Dr. Bright, a lot of people, they do recommend iodine. So a very safe way to start is the Lugol's iodine, 5% and then 1 or 2 drops. Just start low, titrate up, because people will have that question like saying, oh, you mentioned iodine, tell me how much I need, because they want the specifics. So basically the steps to fix your gut, lose weight, lower insulin, quit the carbs, so wheat, sugar, and grains, add in the supplement stack, which we spoke about, including iodine. The next step is what to include. And you mentioned if it has a label, just don't eat it. But earlier you mentioned fermented foods. So if I eat fermented foods, which ones are the best and how often do I have to eat it?
Well, it's all about variety, because even if I had, let's say, 10 different kinds of sauerkraut, they're all going to have different microbial compositions, depending on who made it, what the atmosphere was like, what was resident on the surface of the cabbage, where it was grown, the conditions it was grown in, all that kind of thing, different soils, etc. And so it's not about a specific microbe or specific food, it's about variety. No one knows exactly, are there microbes more important than others? Probably. But the best solution, I think, is to just get a variety of fermented food. So what I follow a very simple rule. Try to include something fermented in every meal. And so a little bit, doesn't have to be a lot, could be a tablespoon of sauerkraut, could be a couple of sips of a kombucha. It could be, and you can make a lot of these things too. We make, for instance, a sparkling juice made with Saccharomyces boulardii, very easy to make at room temperature. We make sparkling juices with Bacillus subtilis. That ferments at about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And by the way, you get these beautiful sparkling juices that have almost no sugar. We don't want sugar. And so we let the microbes ferment, typically for about 72 hours or longer, till it no longer tastes sweet. The only drawback is in boulardii and subtilis, you have to keep the cap on. First of all, you need a juice with no preservatives. It can't have potassium sorbate or sodium benzoate or any of those antimicrobials. And then you leave the cap loose, because you're going to see the thing bubbling, producing carbon dioxide. And if you keep the cap on too tight, it will explode in your kitchen. No one wants that. So there are many things you can ferment. And you can even take those SIBO yogurt species, like Rhodori, gasseri, subtilis. The only drawback is those like something close to human body temperature. So you do have to heat. Let's say you're going to make salsa or pico de gallo with gasseri, you're going to have to do it at something close to human body temperature, which may change and make some of the veggies or fruit mushy. So, but there's a whole variety of things you can do, but the key is to do a whole bunch of different things.
Got it. Okay, next one is hyaluronic acid. Now, you don't tell people to jab their face with hyaluronic acid. You say for people to eat something else to make them look younger. What is that?
Rena, it's another example of how much harm dietary guidelines have inflicted. So dietary guidelines, cut your saturated fat and cholesterol, all that nonsense. One of the things that happened in Americans and Canadians is it made people give up consumption of organ meats. And so we gave up the consumption of hyaluronic acid and collagen, which are abundant in organ meats. So almost nobody anymore. When I was in Montreal, I did manage to get some organ meats, but outside of there, it's very difficult, outside of a French-influenced area. So if I went to a restaurant in the U.S. and tried to order kidney or brain or thymus, good luck with that. You can't. And so the intake of collagen, and both of those, ladies think of those things as something you do for skin health, and that's true. You get collagen or hyaluronic acid orally, and you do have an increase in dermal thickness, dermal collagen, moisture retention, the dermal plumpness, ladies like to say. You also get a regrowth of joint cartilage. You get an increase in joint lubricant, the synovial fluid. You also get all kinds of other benefits. Hyaluronic acid by itself, Rena, is so interesting. So another effect of hyaluronic acid is the uterus, cervix, and vagina is made largely of hyaluronic acid. Well, ladies, particularly over age 65 into menopausal years, have a lot of problems with that. They're much more prone to candida vaginitis, bacterial vaginitis, discharge, etc., partly due to the loss of hyaluronic acid in their diet. The arteries are lined by these hair-like projections called glycocalyx. And what's that made of? Hyaluronic acid. So in other words, we've abandoned this thing that has a multitude. Now, ladies will say this to me. They say, "Oh, don't tell me about hyaluronic acid. I put it right here every day. I I pay $120 for a 1 ounce vial." And I said, "What does that do for the skin on your neck? What does that do for your joints? What does that do for your uterus? What does that do for your heart?" Nothing, of course. So the key, you can do that, and it does work, but the key is to get it orally as it was supposed to have been. Now, the problem is, of course, if I say, "Rena, I want your listeners to go buy some tongue or tripe, stomach,
Or testicles.
or testicles," most would say, "Oh, no, I can't do that." So we resort to supplements. Not because they're better, but because most people are just too squeamish anymore. Understandably.
That's so funny. It's true. Like if you tell somebody to eat some testicles or some tongue, actually my mother-in-law, she makes tongue and I've tried it. It doesn't taste bad. It tastes fine, but we're just not used to it. I want to ask you, so now we've spoken about how to fix the gut and lose weight, also your SIBO yogurt recipe. If somebody wants to know if they have a dysbiotic microbiome, can you look at your poop and tell?
You kind of can, but not with any kind of detail. So stool testing is a test of limited usefulness, not because the technology is limited. It's gotten a lot better. You specifically want to target, by the way, DNA sequencing, not ribosomal RNA sequencing or other methods. You want to look for a service that does DNA because that gives you the greatest detail. Some of the older methods, for instance, would say things like this: "Rena, you have lactobacillus." You say, "Well, which one? Lactobacillus rhodori, gasseri, brevis, which one?" And they say, "We don't know." And so if you DNA sequence, they'll say, "Oh, you have Lactobacillus plantarum, and you don't have Lactobacillus rhodori." They'll tell you more detail. But the basic fundamental drawback of stool testing is it's a rectal sample. And we know, like my friend Dr. Raul Cano and some others have done this, animals and humans, taken stool samples at every inch in the colon, ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, anus, right? Well, the microbiome is different at every location. Well, how about the ileum and jejunum? It's different there too. So if all you're doing is sampling a rectal sample, you got to take it with a grain of salt. It may not represent what's happening in the ascending colon, certainly not the ileum. But it can give you hints. So for instance, the SIBO issue, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, you can't really diagnose that with a stool sample because that's a diagnosis of location, right? Small intestine. But you can kind of guess. If you see something like this, for instance, a lack of lactobacillus, a lack of Akkermansia and Faecalibacterium, and an overabundance of E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, Pseudomonas, Proteus, You can't say it's definitively SIBO, but it sure looks like it. And you can take action based on that. So stool testing, helpful, but you just got to be careful about how you interpret it.
What if somebody has fat droplets in their poop? Is that a sign?
Yes. So people say things like, well, take bile or take pancreatic enzymes. No. What it means, no more than 9 times out of 10, is that you have those proteobacteria or fecal microbes in the duodenum, all the way up the ileum, up the jejunum, into the duodenum, because it's the duodenum where the gallbladder empties bile and where the pancreas empties pancreatic enzymes. And when you have invading fecal microbes in the duodenum, it impairs the activity of bile and pancreatic enzymes, and it blocks the absorption, the digestion of fats, and it gives you fat droplets in the toilet, gives you staining of the porcelain where the water meets the porcelain, it gives you floating poops. And so the solution, not pancreatic enzymes, the solution is address the SIBO. Because that raises an important issue, Rena. People will often choose purposefully or accidentally to ignore the SIBO. Well, that's a hazard. If you say, for instance, well, I had fat malabsorption and it went away when I took pancreatic enzymes, or I thought I had FODMAPs intolerance or nightshade intolerance or histamine intolerance, so I avoided those foods and I feel a little better. You didn't address the cause, the SIBO. And that opens the door for weight gain, dementia, coronary disease, atrial fibrillation, fibromyalgia. In other words, if you bury your head in the sand and allow this process of this infestation of the small intestine by fecal microbial species, long term, it will catch up to you.
That really makes sense because in a previous episode, you mentioned that, people, when they say I can only eat 5 foods, that's because you're not fixing the underlying problem by giving back the microbes to the gut. You're just trying to mask it by not feeding the crappy foods that irritate and the crappy things. I want to turn our attention now beyond weight loss to if you fix the gut microbiome, is that really good for the heart?
Yes. Rena, you're tapping into an area that really needs, if I had better funding, I'd like to long-term explore that better formally, because preliminary evidence is clear. Coronary disease, plaque rupture, that's the process that leads to heart attack and sudden cardiac death. Atrial fibrillation, very common, and congestive heart failure, very bad, are all driven to a large degree by endotoxemia. So in other words, somebody has atrial fibrillation because they led a bad diet for 30, 40 years. They're having recurrences of this very rapid heart rate, irregularly, that puts them at risk for stroke and other things. Well, a trigger for recurrences. So a common problem in atrial fibrillation, somebody says, oh, what's going on here? I can't breathe. My heart rate, 190. Bump it up, it's really rapid, irregular. Go to the ER. They anticoagulate you because there's risk for stroke. They give you drugs like the digoxin, beta blockers, and others to slow your heart rate. Then they give you antiarrhythmics to convert the rhythm, or they give that cardioversion to break it, or they do it. All these things you can do. Let's say it's control. You go home, and then it comes back. Go back to the ER. They do it again. Comes back. And so it's a revolving door. Very frustrating. It messes up your lifestyle. So anything you can do to reduce the likelihood of recurrences, and the evidence is suggesting that endotoxemia is a driver of recurrence. So it doesn't get rid of the mess you've made of your heart muscle, because one of the factors in atrial fibrillation is atrial fibrosis, the replacement of atrial muscle with fibrotic tissue that's electrically unstable. You can't undo that by getting rid of that's a whole other story, a whole other conversation. But you can at least minimize the factors that cause recurrence so that you don't have to go back and forth to the ER and the hospital.
That is very, very interesting because there is not the connection, because people say cholesterol, like drop it to fix your heart disease risk. But you as a cardiologist, you're saying no, look at your gut microbiome, and that is so important to fix your heart. So if somebody has high LDL, can that be related to poor gut microbiome?
It can exaggerate the LDL, but to be honest, Rena, I tell people when they say, what should I do with my high cholesterol? I tell them, get a big, thick black magic marker and cross them out. Cross out total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol because they are at best, semi-fictitious numbers. They're remnants of 1950s, literally 1950s and 1960s crude technology in an effort, once again from the NIH, to understand, to quantify and characterize the lipoproteins, fat-carrying protein in the bloodstream that do cause heart disease. So in 1958, Drs. William Friedewald, Dr. William Frederickson said, well, we can spin blood plasma, the clear part, down, and it layers out low density at the top, high density at the bottom, and other layers in between. Let's choose one of those. How do we count the number of particles? The trillions and trillions of, well, 1958, you can't. So what they said was, well, if we can't actually count the particles, what if we choose one component of each particle and use that as a counting device? Should it be apoprotein B that a lot of them have? Should it be triglycerides? Should it be apoprotein C3? Let's choose cholesterol. So they used cholesterol as this counting device and measured cholesterol. That led to a whole series of poor decisions, misinformation, and then clinical practice. Because the thing that really made it a mainstream phenomenon was the emergence of pharmaceuticals to reduce LDL cholesterol. When LDL cholesterol was nothing more than a crude indirect marker for the lipoprotein. Now, the crazy thing is, you and I can test our lipoproteins. I've been doing it for 30 years. 30 years. Now, the technology has evolved over the years, and now the gold standard is nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR. Essentially taking your plasma and putting it into a magnetic field and having the magnetic field separate the number of particles and characterize them. It's very easy. It's less than $100 in the US. Problem, we have this pharmaceutical industry that says, no, that's experimental. Even though there's been many years of experience, 55 clinical trials in the arena that have shown us that characterization of the lipoproteins is dramatically superior to this crude indirect marker called LDL cholesterol. It's easy to do. Unfortunately, in the US, because it takes some education of the practitioner, a little more sophistication, and rejection of the notion of cholesterol and statin drugs, my colleagues will often say things like, well, it's experimental, or insurance or Medicare won't cover it, or I don't know what the hell that is. Did you consult Dr. Google again? All the crap my colleagues like to say. When the reality is, I've been doing it for 30 years, and it's almost always paid for, and it's easy to interpret if you know what you're doing, and then you have, but you'll see over and over again, people with coronary disease, that's what we're talking about, coronary disease, almost always have an overabundance of small LDL particles. So typical, you do an NMR, somebody with coronary disease who has 3 stents, bypass surgery, survived sudden cardiac death, whatever. They have, let's say, 2,400 nanomoles per liter, particle count per volume of small LDL. I'm sorry, of total LDL, of which, let's say, 2,000 is small. So 2,000 over 2,400, whatever that is, 80%, something like that. You go wheat, grain, sugar-free, because they provoke formation of small LDL. You address factors that impact insulin resistance, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, magnesium, iodine. You address endotoxemia, small LDL, total LDL particle number now 1,200, small LDL, 0. Now you achieve that, Rena, at almost no cost. You've eradicated, now there's other things you can do, but you've eradicated one of the major drivers of coronary disease, and it didn't require a drug, didn't require any extreme efforts, just took a handful. And by the way, all the things you and I have talked about are all restoring factors whose need is written into your genetic code, and without which you get very sick or die. And so all we're doing is replacing things that you should have had all along. That's all we're doing.
Absolutely. I think that if more people would understand that fix the gut, lower the insulin, fix your whole body. I know in this conversation, we're talking about the gut microbiome and people wanting to lose weight, but really these practices is going to fix every single problem that somebody has, including erectile dysfunction. If you correct the SIBO, is that gonna correct erectile dysfunction as well?
Well, if the correction of SIBO and endotoxin occurs in the context of all the other things we've talked about, the diet, those nutrients, because what we're talking about is restoring endothelial function, that is the capacity of the lining of your arteries, whether it's in the heart or arms or penis, to respond and dilate when necessary and constrict when necessary. So all the things we've talked about contribute. No wheat, no grains, no sugars, because you eliminate small LDL, vitamin D, etc. You restore sensitivity of the arteries. Hyaluronic acid restores the glycocalyx. All those things. It's not immediate, though. It takes time to restore erectile capacity. By the way, when you lose abdominal visceral fat and address endotoxemia, one of the effects in males is a marked increase in testosterone. So I see guys doing topical or with pellets. No. Restore the factors that are keeping your testosterone low. One of the things we haven't talked about is the huge impact on reproductive health of endotoxemia. Huge. In a woman, it disrupts ovulation. It disrupts maturation of the oocyte or the embryo. It impacts the ability of the embryo to colonize the uterus. It inflames the uterus. I have now 3 grandchildren because my daughter-in-law has just she delivered her last child just a few months ago, and she has no shortage of resources, and she gets none of this. Rena gets, because my son's kind of a wise ass like me, and they'll go to the doctor and they'll say to the obstetrician, "Hey doc, what's the role of probiotics in pregnancy?" "Oh, they've been shown to be ineffective." What? That's a whole other conversation, Rita. The role of microbes and other nutrients in pregnancy, in mature females, and in menopausal years. Huge factor. So just in pregnancy alone, omega-3 fatty acids, the evidence is clear-cut. It's one of the most powerful things you can do to reduce the likelihood of premature delivery of a child. Because, if a woman delivers a child at 28 weeks, it's catastrophic for a lifetime. That child's going to be impaired psychologically, immunologically, neurologically. So if you can do anything to delay to full term of 40 weeks, you ought to do it. And omega-3s, because the average woman gets about 130 milligrams of EPA DHA. We're using 3,300 or more. A child, omega-3s are crucial for neurological maturation. Child gets almost nothing. If mom is deprived, baby cannibalizes whatever she has and gets very little through breast milk or gets converted to formula that has almost zero. So we impair a child's neurological impairment because of this silly thing. How about Bifidobacterium infantis? If a child lacks Bifidobacterium infantis because mom didn't have the gift to that child is unable to metabolize human milk oligosaccharides in breast milk. And if that child cannot metabolize human milk oligosaccharides, its capacity for brain development, for immunological development is impaired. It will have impaired neurological maturation. It's more prone to asthma, eczema, type 1 diabetes, autoimmune diseases, obesity as an adolescent, and will have a lower IQ. So in other words, there's a ton of things ladies can do for healthier pregnancy, safer delivery, healthier child, and it's not being passed on. Because, as you know, obstetricians, gynecologists, and doctors in general are not educated in health. This is a tragedy that my colleagues are not experts in health. They're experts in the delivery of revenue-generating procedures and products. And so that's why what you're doing is so important. Because it's not going to come from the gynecologist, it's not going to come from the primary care physician, because they don't care. That's the biggest crime here, I think, Rena. It's not the ignorance, it's the indifference. That's what bugs me.
Dr. Davis, thank you so much for your time. The message here is that if we can fix our microbiome and fix our health and give the body back what it needs, everything else is going to fix. I'm going to link your new book, Super Body, then your other books in the description, and highly recommend the audience to take a look at those to understand how you can reclaim your body with the pollutants in the world. So Dr. Davis, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rena. Please keep on doing what you're doing. In the U.S., certainly NBC, ABC, CBS, and other major media outlets have abdicated their responsibility and no longer entertain people like you and me. So it's up to people like you to broadcast messages of health.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out this one with Dr. Sarah Myhill, everything about how to fix the gut microbiome and the 3 supplements that you need to fix your microbiome instantly, including iodine. I'll see you next week.